With one decisive stroke of his pen, King Charles revoked Camilla's claim to the home that had represented her position beside him for years. The document before him did not simply reassign a royal residence. It directed Camilla's departure from Clarence House and transferred stewardship of the historic estate to Princess Sophie, triggering an emotional shockwave within the monarchy before the public knew anything had changed. Before we explore what this truly means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. Charles remained motionless after the ink dried. He sat at the desk staring at the completed document without saying a word. The Emergency Residence Decree, an official royal directive determining who may oversee a royal residence, removed Camilla's authority over Clarence House, its staff, ceremonial spaces, and household operations. For the king, the decision carried deep personal history. The residence had sheltered the Queen Mother, shaped his years as Prince of Wales, and later became the place where the Queen Consort struggled to earn acceptance. Camilla sensed the impact before anyone explained it. She accepted the sealed envelope, broke the seal, and read the opening paragraph twice. Her grip tightened on the chair as the devastating reality settled in. This was not a temporary relocation, not an administrative adjustment, and not a request she could postpone. She was being removed from the residence that had become the center of her public identity. The decree contained an even greater surprise. A confidential provision granted Sophie far more than the right to occupy the house. She would oversee household appointments, ceremonial privileges, the private archives, and the future royal use of the estate. In simple terms, the trusted confidant was not receiving spare rooms. She was inheriting the authority Camilla had spent years establishing. Charles had finalized the directive quietly several days earlier. Palace records revealed that only William, Sophie, and 2 constitutional advisors, experts who counsel the monarch on official royal matters, were aware of what was about to happen. The future king had reviewed the draft. The trusted confidant had already been summoned. Camilla, however, remained completely outside the circle until the order had been finalized. Then came the final humiliation. Before she even had the chance to demand an explanation from the king, an aide informed her that Sophie had already been invited to receive the principal keys. The Queen Consort slowly lowered the document, stunned by what that single gesture represented. A key could unlock a door, but this one would close an entire chapter. As Camilla stood frozen with the decree still in her hands, one question echoed through the silence. Why had Charles chosen Sophie to replace her? Clarence House had never been just another royal residence. It was a symbol of belonging. For Charles, it represented decades of duty and personal sacrifice. For Camilla, it became the stronghold where she fought to secure acceptance. For Sophie, it had always remained beyond her reach, connected to a royal position she had never sought. Now those 3 lives were colliding because of a decision none of them could escape emotionally. Charles had carried the burden of Clarence House long before ascending the throne. The residence was woven into his family history, his years as Prince of Wales, and the long period when he prepared for the crown under constant public scrutiny. The title Prince of Wales simply refers to the traditional role held by the monarch's eldest son and heir. Those walls had witnessed him waiting, enduring, and discovering how power could both protect a person and quietly imprison them. Meanwhile, Camilla wandered slowly through the morning room, gently resting her hand on the back of a chair she had personally selected years earlier. She remembered the effort she had invested in making the residence feel like undeniable proof that she truly belonged beside him. Now every room seemed to tell an entirely different story. Sophie felt no sense of triumph when the summons arrived. She read the message once, then quietly handed it to Edward without speaking. The trusted confidant finally admitted that accepting Clarence House could easily appear to the public as a victory over Camilla. Even though she had never requested the residence, the authority, or the conflict surrounding it, Edward listened as she confessed that duty was beginning to feel uncomfortably close to betrayal. William viewed the situation differently. During a private conversation with Charles, the prince supported the transfer because he believed the residence had become surrounded by internal factions, unofficial influence, and competing loyalties. He argued that Sophie could restore stability without allowing Clarence House to become a separate center of royal power. The future king was not celebrating Camilla's downfall. He was focused on what the monarchy itself could survive. Charles, however, carried another reason he had not yet revealed. A confidential household assessment, a private review of staff, authority, and internal conduct, identified Sophie as the most dependable senior royal for highly sensitive responsibilities. The report praised her quiet dedication, demanding overseas engagements and unwavering loyalty to the late Queen. It also warned that Clarence House could no longer remain secure while authority remained divided. Sophie agreed to meet the king. But before entering the room, she made one request. She wanted to examine the report herself and understand precisely what had convinced Charles that Camilla could no longer remain. That document would eventually lead Sophie back to one private royal ceremony, and to the exact moment Charles decided there was no path back. The crisis had not begun with the decree. It had begun weeks earlier during a closed royal reception where one unexpected instruction transformed quiet tension into open defiance. Only a handful of people witnessed what happened that evening. Yet it permanently changed Charles's view of Camilla. Long before Clarence House was reassigned, one ceremony exposed a struggle over authority that could no longer remain hidden. Charles had spent months trying to contain the growing tension. Private guest lists were quietly being revised. Household briefings were reaching the wrong people. Ceremonial access had slowly become an invisible battleground. A ceremonial receiving line, the official order in which senior royals welcome distinguished guests, may appear routine, but within palace life it reflects rank, confidence, and public standing. The king believed every disagreement could still be resolved behind closed doors. Because once family conflict reached the machinery of the crown, both his marriage and the monarchy could suffer together. Camilla made her decision only moments before the Commonwealth patronage reception began. She quietly called an aide into the Clarence House garden room and instructed him to remove Sophie's name from the principal receiving line. The Queen Consort spoke calmly, but the message behind the order was unmistakable. The trusted confidant would no longer stand among the senior royals greeting the guests. Everyone present would immediately recognize that her position had been deliberately reduced. Sophie discovered the alteration just outside the reception room. She glanced at the revised program, folded it carefully, and handed it back to the aide without a single complaint. Then she completed the entire reception with remarkable composure. Yet Charles noticed the pain hidden beneath that restraint. He watched her smile warmly at every guest, while fully aware she had been publicly diminished during a ceremony built upon loyalty and service. The silence finally ended after the last visitor departed. Charles confronted Camilla privately and asked whether she had authorized the change. She offered no denial. Instead, she replied that Sophie needed to understand where real authority belonged. The king heard far more than confidence in those words. He heard a direct challenge to his own authority. Then even more troubling evidence emerged. A recorded household memorandum, an official internal document preserving royal decisions and instructions, revealed this had not been an isolated incident. 3 previous ceremonial arrangements had also been altered without the king's final approval. Guest access, seating order, and speaking responsibilities. All had been quietly adjusted through Camilla's private network. Charles studied the memorandum twice. Then he placed it beside the unfinished emergency residence decree and sat in complete silence for several long moments. The king had already tried compromise. He had already shown patience. Now both had reached their limit. He issued one final instruction. Camilla was to meet him alone. No ads. No private secretaries. No members of the royal family. By the time Camilla entered the room, Charles was no longer preparing for negotiation. He was preparing to tell her what she had already lost. There were no raised voices at first. That silence made the confrontation even more unsettling. Charles stood beside the fireplace while the signed decree rested on a table between them. Camilla remained near the doorway, refusing the chair he had quietly offered. 2 people who had endured scandal, rejection, and decades of public judgment now faced an entirely different danger. The collapse of trust inside the very home they had defended together. Charles spoke first. His voice carried no warmth. He explained that the decision would not affect her royal title, but her authority over Clarence House had come to an end. The crown, the monarchy as an institution existing beyond the private emotions of the royal family, had to be protected from divided control. The king insisted this was not an act of revenge within their marriage. It was a boundary he believed should have been established long ago. Camilla immediately understood what he was taking away. Clarence House was far more than a residence. It provided loyal staff, private meeting rooms, influence over official schedules, and a visible centre from which her authority reached across the royal household. Without it, the Queen Consort would still hold her title. But the machinery supporting that title would now answer to Sophie. Charles slowly slid the decree across the table. The transfer, he said, would take effect immediately. Camilla made no move to touch the document. Instead, she looked directly into his eyes and asked whether William had persuaded his father to humiliate her. The king answered calmly. The signature was his. The judgment was his. And the consequences would also be his. Camilla pushed the offered chair farther away. She accused Charles of rewarding Sophie for silent loyalty while punishing his own wife for speaking honestly. She argued that the trusted confidant had mastered the art of appearing harmless while quietly earning the family's confidence. Her tone remained composed. Yet every sentence carried years of fear, resentment, and determination. Only then did Charles reveal what the confidential household review had uncovered. A documented internal report showed that private briefings had been circulated under Camilla's name without his approval. Those briefings included recommendations concerning Sophie's public duties, ceremonial access, and official role. The king told her that disagreement was acceptable. Operating through unofficial channels was not. Camilla responded with an accusation that struck even deeper than the decree itself. She claimed William had spent months building a case against her, and had used the reception incident to force Charles into choosing between his future reign and his marriage. According to her, the future king had never wanted reform. He wanted her influence removed before inheriting the throne. Charles remained silent for several long seconds. Then he opened the door himself and instructed the transition team to begin immediately. Camilla stood motionless behind him, hurt yet unyielding, as her accusation lingered in the room long after he walked away. The house had been taken from Camilla, but the greater battle had only just begun. It was no longer about a residence. It was about who had truly influenced the king's decision. A royal decree may bear a single signature, yet power rarely moves through only one pair of hands. Behind Charles's decision stood confidential assessments, constitutional concerns, family loyalties, and William's growing determination to shape the monarchy he would one day inherit. When father and son finally met in private, Charles demanded an answer to the accusation Camilla had left behind. The king entered the private library carrying the household review beneath his arm. He placed the document on the table between them before repeating Camilla's allegation word for word. He wanted to know whether William had manipulated the investigation, pressured royal advisors, or transformed one reception dispute into a weapon against Camilla. William met his father's gaze without hesitation. Yet the silence between them carried years of unspoken tension. The prince understood why the question mattered. A separate royal court, an unofficial center of influence built around one household, could quietly shape staff appointments, patronages, access, and public messaging without openly challenging the sovereign. As heir to the throne, William possessed no authority to remove Camilla from Clarence House. But his warnings carried enormous influence because every private rivalry created today could become tomorrow's constitutional crisis. William answered with restrained frustration. He admitted providing Charles with staff statements and revised briefing records. However, he firmly denied demanding Camilla's removal. The future king insisted that Charles had reached the decision himself because the evidence left no realistic alternative. He had revealed the problem. He had not signed the decree. Charles pressed further. He asked whether Sophie had been involved from the beginning. William then disclosed details from a recorded family consultation. Surprisingly, Sophie had initially defended Camilla. The trusted confidant had requested mediation, a private effort to resolve the dispute before formal punishment became necessary. She had warned that removing the queen consort could fracture the family and make Clarence House appear to be a prize. That revelation changed everything. Charles had believed Sophie accepted the decision because she recognized its necessity. Now he discovered she had resisted the proposal until duty ultimately outweighed personal feelings. William quietly placed another confidential document before his father. It was a succession planning assessment identifying Sophie as the preferred stabilizing figure during any future transition of power. Simply put, senior advisors believed Sophie could safeguard the monarchy during the difficult period between one reign and the next. Charles slowly realized the appointment had support far beyond William alone. Senior royals, constitutional advisors, and household officials had all independently reached the same conclusion. The decision remained his, but the concerns behind it were widely shared. Then an urgent message interrupted the discussion. Camilla had begun dismissing staff, opening private cabinets, and packing documents not authorized for removal. Charles immediately stopped reading. William understood the significance at once. The argument was no longer about influence. While the king questioned who had shaped his decision, Camilla had already begun deciding what Clarence House would lose before Sophie ever stepped inside. The first sign of the fallout did not come through an official announcement. It came from the sound of drawers opening behind locked doors. Camilla moved through Clarence House with the careful precision of someone refusing to appear defeated. Staff members received conflicting instructions. Personal cases began appearing in the corridors. Sealed boxes were quietly carried toward a waiting vehicle as the residents slowly surrendered the life that had once filled it. Camilla understood that the decree allowed her to remove her personal belongings. But anything belonging to the crown had to remain. Crown-owned items, objects held on behalf of the monarchy rather than private property, could not leave the residence. That included official correspondence, historic furnishings, household archives, and state records. The distinction mattered. Clarence House was never simply her home. It was also a working royal residence connected to public duty, royal history, and constitutional responsibility. Charles dispatched a transition team before the confusion could spread further. Officials immediately began cataloguing rooms, reassigning staff,
Securing confidentielle archive.
and preparing the residence for Sophie's formal stewardship. Stewardship meant managing the residence on behalf of the crown rather than owning it personally. The king wanted an orderly transition. Yet every room inspected, every cabinet sealed, and every inventory completed made Camilla's departure feel increasingly irreversible. She quietly entered the private dining room and suddenly stopped. Her place card had already disappeared from its silver holder. She instructed the remaining staff to leave. After the door closed, she sat alone at the table. The queen consort did not cry. She simply stared at the empty holder, overwhelmed by how quickly an entire life could be reduced to an administrative decision. Sophie, meanwhile, refused to cross the threshold while the packing continued. During a documented telephone conversation, she informed Charles that she would not allow another woman's departure to resemble a ceremony of personal victory. The trusted confidant understood that accepting Clarence House was a duty, but arriving too early would make the transition appear like conquest. Charles respected her decision. However, the delay created an unexpected complication. The alarm came from the royal archives. A locked dispatch box containing confidential correspondence about royal patronages had disappeared from its registered cabinet. A dispatch box is a secure case used to store highly sensitive official documents. Camilla's private secretary confirmed that it had been removed under her direct instructions. Yet palace officials warned that everything inside now fell under the authority already transferred to Sophie. Charles prepared to send royal security immediately. Sophie stopped him. Instead, she requested one private meeting with Camilla. She asked that the missing dispatch box be placed between them, completely unopened. For the first time since the decree had been signed, the struggle would move beyond Charles and William, and into the hands of the two women forced to live with its consequences. No advisor stood beside them. No courtier softened the conversation. Sophie entered the room alone. Camilla was already waiting beside the sealed dispatch box that had sparked fresh concern inside the palace. What followed was not a struggle for rank. It became a deeply personal reckoning between two women who had endured the same institution in completely different ways, and who both understood that only one of them would leave with Clarence House. Sophie had requested the meeting because she refused to begin her stewardship through humiliation. Stewardship meant managing the royal residence on behalf of the crown rather than possessing it personally. She knew that if security officers seized the dispatch box or officials forced Camilla aside, the transfer would appear as though one royal woman was celebrating another's downfall. The trusted confidant wanted order, not cruelty. Camilla accepted the meeting for an entirely different reason. She wanted to hear, without Charles, William, or advisors present, whether Sophie had played any role in removing her. The queen consort watched her carefully, searching for triumph, guilt, or even satisfaction. Instead, she found only quiet discomfort. Without opening it, Sophie gently lifted the dispatch box and placed it back in front of Camilla. She explained that she had no interest in taking her private letters, cherished memories, or personal sorrow. She wanted only the official documents that belonged to the crown. The trusted confidant quietly added that inheriting Clarence House did not give her permission to erase the woman who had once lived there. For the first time, Camilla's composure finally began to break. According to a recorded private account later preserved by a household secretary, she admitted why she had removed Sophie's name from the Commonwealth reception. She confessed that she feared the royal family was quietly presenting Sophie as a more acceptable image of a queen consort. Loyal without controversy. Trusted without suspicion. Influential without appearing ambitious. She admitted she had stopped seeing Sophie as a colleague, and had begun seeing her as a replacement. Sophie answered with a revelation of her own. She explained that Charles had offered her Clarence House only after she repeatedly urged him to find another solution. The king believed refusing the residence would leave Clarence House trapped inside the very conflict that had created the crisis. She accepted the responsibility, not because she desired Camilla's place, but because declining it would only deepen the damage already done. Camilla lowered her eyes toward the dispatch box. Slowly, she unlocked it herself. She removed a single personal letter, held it tightly in her hand, then quietly pushed every remaining official document across the table toward Sophie. No apology was exchanged. None was necessary. The queen consort had surrendered the official records, and with them, the final hope that the transfer could somehow still be reversed. Sophie promised there would be no celebration when she entered Clarence House. But outside those closed doors, secrecy had already collapsed. Their private understanding had arrived too late to contain the shock. Because by morning, Britain was about to witness Clarence House transformed into the ultimate symbol of a royal reckoning. By sunrise, what had begun as a private family conflict had become the biggest royal story in Britain. Television networks abandoned scheduled programming. Newspapers rushed out special editions. Crowds gathered outside Clarence House long before the palace released a single official statement. Yet amid the growing attention, one image captured the meaning of the decree more clearly than any headline. The closed gates of Camilla's former residence, waiting for Princess Sophie's arrival. The palace eventually broke its silence through a carefully worded statement confirming that Clarence House had been reassigned to Sophie as part of an immediate household restructuring. A household restructuring refers to an official change in who oversees a royal residence, its staff, and its daily responsibilities. The wording sounded calm, but it could not conceal the significance of the decision. The statement explained what had changed, while carefully avoiding the personal conflict that had led Charles to act. Commentators quickly filled the silence with competing theories. Some described the transfer as punishment. Others viewed it as succession planning, preparing the royal family for the transition of responsibilities from one reign to the next. A few even suggested marital separation. Others believed Sophie's appointment reflected a deliberate effort to place a more trusted figure at the center of the senior royal family. Regardless of the explanation, one conclusion remained the same. Camilla had lost far more than a residence. Edward watched the unfolding coverage beside Sophie. He quietly asked whether she still intended to accept Clarence House after witnessing the growing public reaction. The trusted confidant answered without hesitation. Refusing now would not spare Camilla from embarrassment. It would only undermine Charles's authority, create confusion within the monarchy, and make the transfer appear to be an act of personal revenge rather than royal duty. Meanwhile, Camilla watched the continuous broadcasts from a temporary residence. She maintained her composure, until one television presenter referred to Clarence House as Princess Sophie's future royal headquarters. Without saying a word, she reached for the remote, and quietly switched off the screen. That single phrase reduced years of service, struggle, and survival into one painful replacement. Soon another powerful image dominated the headlines. A fictional front page of the London Chronicle displayed two empty chairs beneath the headline. The House Charles divided. Outside Clarence House, supporters placed flowers for Sophie. Others left handwritten messages defending Camilla. One location. Two very different definitions of justice. Then a live broadcast revealed one final decision. Sophie would retain the existing household staff. She would not replace them with her own team. Nor would she dismantle the structure Camilla had spent years building. That announcement eased some of the public anger. It also made Sophie's intention unmistakably clear. Responsibility, not conquest. Watching the public mood begin to shift, Charles summoned the royal family for one final private gathering. He intended to explain what the transfer truly meant, and what it never had. The world had already reached its own verdict through headlines, but the final judgment would come only from the family that had quietly lived through the crisis behind closed doors. In the final family meeting, there were no cameras,
No cheering crowds.
and no attempt to disguise the damage that had already been done. Only a king, a wounded queen consort, a reluctant successor to Clarence House, and a truth none of them could avoid any longer. Charles gathered Camilla, Sophie, Edward, and William to define the final terms of the transition. The queen consort would retain her royal title, her dignity, and her place within the royal family, but she would no longer oversee Clarence House or the official household machinery connected to it. That machinery referred to the staff, schedules, private offices, and administrative systems through which a royal residence carried out its public responsibilities. The king wanted everyone to understand one thing. This was not exile. It was a boundary. Sophie accepted Clarence House as a place of duty rather than personal reward. She pledged to preserve its historic rooms, retain the existing staff, and prevent the residence from becoming a rival center of influence. A rival court refers to an unofficial power base formed around one royal household instead of the sovereign. The trusted confidant understood that entering with celebration would transform responsibility into conquest. So she chose restraint instead. Charles slowly lifted the principal key and extended it toward Sophie. Yet before releasing it, his hand paused. The king looked across the room toward Camilla. She met his eyes, then gave a single restrained nod. Only then did Charles place the key into Sophie's hand. No applause followed. The silence itself became the final agreement. Camilla then spoke quietly to Charles. She admitted that removing her from Clarence House might protect the crown, but it would forever change their marriage. The queen consort asked for no comfort, and the king offered no promise he could not keep. He accepted that duty had preserved the institution, while deeply wounding the relationship. William later discovered one final clause within the documented decree. It prevented any future monarch or consort from using Clarence House to control patronages, staff appointments, or royal access without written approval from a sovereign. The future king immediately understood what his father had done. Charles had not merely resolved a family dispute. He had permanently closed the path that allowed such conflicts to grow. Sophie made one final decision of her own. She announced that the room dedicated to Camilla's charitable work would remain exactly as it was, preserving both her years of service and the lesson left behind by the crisis. Camilla departed carrying her private letter and her royal title, but without the power base she had fought so hard to secure. Sophie entered Clarence House without celebration, carrying responsibility instead of triumph. Charles remained king, yet the decision demanded a deeply personal price. In the end, Clarence House became more than a royal residence. It became the place where Charles proved that loyalty could never survive without limits, where Sophie proved that duty required no ambition, and where Camilla discovered that even the strongest royal position could be lost when influence crossed the line into control. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.